Welcome to Lincoln Fire and Rescue on LNK TV. My name is Dale Johnson. We get you caught up on all the moving parts that make up Lincoln Fire and Rescue. And Lincoln Fire and Rescue Chief Michael Despain is here. Chief, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks again for letting us come talk.
Getting all the viewers caught up on everything. And there's a lot to get caught up on. Yeah. Another big day in the life of Lincoln Fire and Rescue here recently, Station 11. Open for business?
Yes, we are open for business now, and for people that are watching that don't know, that's the new station that's essentially at Northwest 48 and West Adams. And that station was kind of embedded into the property on the west side of the airport. Now it's moved out a little bit more centrally located. So a new facility, we expect to see better response times out of there, because every time we had calls in Station 11's area, Northwest Lincoln, it took about a minute extra, as opposed to any other station in the city, to get to a major cross street to then get to the call. So we anticipate very good response times out of there here pretty soon.
And this is a brand new station from the ground up.
Ground up, yeah.
Replacing the one at the west end of the runway.
Yes, the first brand new station in Lincoln in over 20 years.
What's involved in a move? I moved from apartment to apartment, apartment to house to house. How do you move a fire station?
There's a lot of the similar things, washers and dryers, or sometimes we saw things that were too old and we bought new ones for the new station. But there's a lot of specialized equipment that has to come over or be embedded into that. So there's a lot of technology now in fire stations. They're not kind of maybe what you saw back in the day. So a lot of that piece has to come over. And really today, if you walked over today and looked at it, it's operational, responding out there. But we would equate to it's about 95% ready to go. There's still a few things we're trying to pull some fiber optic to certain areas so it gets better sound quality when the tones go off, station alerting, programming, those kind of things. So we're still not 100% there, but definitely seeing the benefits to the community already.
We're going to talk about a number of stations: 15, 10, 12, 16. I need notes because it's hard to keep up without a program, Chief. But through all of this, I'm curious about staffing.
Right.
There was a point in the discussion among LFR and the community of being able to pull off expansion without hiring staff. And I remember hearing that early on, Chief, before you arrived in Lincoln, and scratching my head and thinking, how can this happen? How is this going to happen?
Right.
Explain how this expansion also, to some extent, expands personnel.
Right. Well, when you go back to, and this would be probably 2010, 2011, well before I was here, so I'm gathering this from people that were involved in that. But part of the discussion was how to redistribute resources to basically cover the most rooftops with the existing number of personnel and apparatus and that kind of stuff. Now, back then, there was a math that you could use that would probably get you there. What's happened in the meantime is the city has just grown so exponentially, not only in population and geography, but also in call volume. So our call volume, something happened about 2010, 2011, 2013, where we started to see this exponential increase in call volume that you hadn't seen in a decade before that. Typically, call volume increased at the level of population growth. Mm-hmm. Now it's 3 times that. Part of that is an aging population, and people over 60, 65 use our services more than other people, and that's universal. That's not just Lincoln. So what's happened is the demand for service is so much bigger now, and it grew 3 times faster than anticipated. So even though the stations and where they're being located is essentially the right location for that plan, what's happened is now if you take resources out of the urban core and you spread them out, what'll happen is you'll be on time for these, let's say, 100 calls in far southeast Lincoln, but you'll be late to 3,000 calls in the urban core. And so we've also looked at how insurance and outcomes, we use the term outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's chance of surviving a fire, a cardiac event, your insurance rate, what comes out of your pocket. We also have much better data now to show what makes a difference. And so even if you live on one side of town And you might think, I don't care about what happens on the north end of town or the south end of town. That's their problem. Insurance rates are based on the geography of the city itself. So outside the city, a much different rate than inside the city, but inside the city, we're kind of in the same boat. And so what we want to do is make sure that we keep it low, insurance rates low in, for the whole city means we got to make sure that we're taking care of fires in all areas. And so you don't want to be late to 3,000 fires to be on time for 300 fires because everybody's going to pay that price. So the plan moving forward is strictly just saying the station's in the right location, but now we have different data that shows there's a different outcome. And so we could still redistribute assets and resources just like what was talked about back in 2010. But what would happen is you would save, and this is just using round numbers, is per person you would save about $5 per person per year, but your insurance would go up by about $25 to $30 per person per year. So one pocket or the other, you're still going to be net negative. So what we're trying to do is add $5 per person to do what we're trying to do, but it will reduce the costs by about $15 to $20 per person. So we're trying to move it in the opposite direction because that's the most efficient. It's the most effective, but it's also the most efficient if you're looking at budget and per capita costs.
What just is going through my head is thinking how a factory can incorporate robotics to replace people. You can't do that in a fire department.
Well,
you can use robots. I'm not
Yeah.
saying the use of robots. I'm saying you have to have personnel. You have to have numbers, a
Right.
certain amount of numbers, men and women in suits and gear,
Right.
in order to fight a fire.
Well, funny you should say that there is a trend towards robotics, and I would use the example of right now we're in the process of trying to secure a drone to help get aerial reconnaissance of incidents so we get faster intel and we can kind of speed up some of our decision-making processes. So we're in that process, and technically that's a robot. We are involved with the explosive ordnance disposal. So when there's bomb scares, it's LFR personnel that are going down and helping to secure that. They use robots. So we do that. And I see in the future, I predict that you'll see robotics involved with some of the firefighting. But the problem is that industry is still far ways away. We're not there yet. And when it gets here, it will still be just many, many decades to where I just don't see a time where it could totally replace people. And here's a good example is if I have to do something really exhausting and I have to carry hose or equipment or climb up 20 flights of stairs to do something, robots can help carry that up and help us be more efficient. But when you're working a medical, let's say a cardiac event or trauma, there's no machine out there. They're not sophisticated enough, nor will I think they'll be able to kind of get over that human touch piece of it. So robotics will be part of it, but I don't see them taking it all over. But for today's discussion, for the next decade this is how we do business and this is the best we can do.
Well, my reference point comes from listening to the scanner and hearing the battalion chief communicate with all the firefighters on all four sides, A, B, C, and D sides, and how they're asking questions about what the firefighter on the ground sees on side A. The battalion chief sees some smoke coming from the top. That they ask there is so much communication going on simultaneously that I couldn't imagine a robot being able to calculate and to react to what a human sees.
Yeah, I think, again, it'll be many years where you see them trend, and I think the first step you'll see is, like we said, with drones and the bomb disposal robots, those kind of things. That's step one. And then step two would be maybe one robot per fire apparatus that the crews could use for the really strenuous, just kind of the grunt labor type work until that technology gets so sophisticated that it can make some of those decisions. And I think in 30, 40 years, you might see firefighters doing everything inside the fire where it's the most dangerous, that's all robotics doing that, and firefighters on the outside helping. But probably not during my lifetime.
No, that's a whole nother show.
Whole nother show, Chief. Yeah.
All right, on to Station 15, 66th and Pine Lake Road. This is a joint fire station and police station. And I'm interested about the uniqueness of this, or is this a trend?
I don't know that it's necessarily a trend, but it's not new. A lot of agencies I've worked at before had combination police fire facilities. The thing that I think is important is we're fortunate in Lincoln that police and fire get along so well. In the field, they're just such a camaraderie, brotherhood, sisterhood, that they work so well together. And we're fortunate because really the benefactor of that is the community, because you just have first responders falling over themselves to help each other, to help you, and so that's great. So we're fortunate that we can house together and get along, where in some agencies it just does not work that well. So we're fortunate. But the other piece is we now have a facility servicing people in Southeast Lincoln that instead of having 2 buildings and 2 pieces of land and 2 parking lots and 2 backup generators and 2 of this, we've done it in 1. So we saved a lot of costs. The service to the community is great, and it comes online faster. And again, I think it helps build the relationship between those 2 organizations, LFR and LPD.
Opening up in the spring of next year?
That's our hope. Construction is always kind of dependent on weather and that kind of stuff, but right now we think in April of 2019 is what we're expecting.
Station 10 is moving. It's moving from 14th and Adams to 24th and Superior. And what is the expected completion or the expected opening for Station 10?
So Station 15 is our priority for a couple of reasons. One, that area is unprotected, where Station 10 and Station 12 is really just a repositioning of areas that are kind of already protected. So all the attention right now and resources are going to open Station 15 sooner. Soon as that one gets farther along, then they will jump into Station 10 and 12 to move those along. Those will be the next priority. And in those cases, that's somewhere between that April of 2019 and January of 2020. So there's about an 8-month window. So you're going to see the sequence of, fire stations, just 1, 2, 3, 4, open fairly quickly. And it's really as fast as construction can move a project from one to the other.
So in a perfect world, Station 15, April of 19, Station 10, August of 19, and then Station 12, which is the next one we'll talk about, expected to open up in late 2019.
Yes.
In a perfect world.
And 16, which would be the final one,
Right.
somewhere around January of 2020.
That's the last of the plan? 16?
Well, that's the last of that station optimization plan. We're already working on land for what we would call Station 17 and 18, even though we don't see the need for those facilities for many years down the road. We just want to get the land secured, because there was a lot of controversy with the community when you move a fire station into an existing area. There's a lot of emotional feelings about that, and so by getting and staking your flag first, then there's less impact to the
That
community.
way the community and the citizens and the home builders
Everybody knows what to
what's
expect.
there.
Yep.
Know what's expected. So January 2020 for Station 16. Let's move on to the city budget, because all of this can't happen without money, all of this construction. What are the big issues going through LFR onto the city budget?
The 2 biggest issues that we see moving forward is the ability to fund the staffing, or we would say sometimes it's overtime, because we can't always recruit fast enough to fill what we would call those 2 new stations that are coming on board. Those will be 2 new engine companies. And then the apparatus that it is needed to support the existing fleet, and then of course that new risk that's coming on board. So apparatus will be the big one, and that's probably going to be the biggest issue that you see coming forward. The mayor's proposed budget, we were only able to get funding was only allowing us to pick up 2 apparatus in that, and that's not quite enough to get the fleet healthy again. We have a new amendment brought forward by one of our council members to add about additional 6 to that. We think we can get about another 6 to that, so that'd be 8 apparatus overnight. We need 12. So it doesn't solve all of our problems, but it gets us a long ways there. And the more apparatus we get, kind of updated, so the fleet is healthier, then there's the less number of apparatus that are creating problems. So for some people, I think it was a kind of big deal on social media and in the Journal Star recently about one of our engines that broke down in the middle of Highway 2 and 70th and locked up traffic at rush hour in the evening for a long time. And we don't like doing that, and that's not what we want to do. But the reality is we just have vehicles that are getting beat up, and it's time for them to be replaced. And we want them to be replaced so that when they go into reserve status, they're still useful. You don't want really good frontline apparatus and really horrible backup because there are times we have to switch out frontline for backup routinely day by day. And your insurance rates are based on the agency's health of that fleet in both categories, frontline and reserve.
How are the ambulances doing, the fleet of?
Yeah, the
Emergency
ambulances
vehicles.
are doing okay right now, mainly because they're a little easier to replace, and that's an enterprise fund, so taxpayers don't pay for that. That's user fees, and so it's a little less controversial at budget time, but still, that's a program that we need to stay on top of. About a month ago, 6 weeks ago now, we opened up a new medic unit 24/7, so Station 1, Medic 1 downtown. So we went from 6 ambulances frontline with 6 reserves to 7 frontline and 4 reserves, because one of our reserves had to go back into frontline service to be able to provide that. And then in the meantime, we had one ambulance that had a catastrophic failure, and so we had to do an emergency purchase about a month ago. And so we that is seeing the same kind of risk we have with the frontline fire apparatus, but we see that as there's some light at the end of the tunnel where it's a little easier to solve it money-wise. The problem we have right now is some of the vehicles that we need to replace are not available for a while because there's some restructuring in corporate America where a factory in Mexico is coming back to Detroit, and that's great, it's coming back to America, but the problem is they're shut down for a year. So that means 50% of the fleet we typically use for these type of vehicles are now not available for a little while, and then everybody's scrambling for what's left. So it could be the fact that you have lots of money, there's no vehicles to get because, or they'll give it to you, but you're on a 1-year waiting list instead of a 6-month waiting list. So those are the struggles we're dealing with now.
And there is no fast food restaurant equivalent for for making fire rigs.
There's no dealer where you walk on and say, yeah, I want 7 of those, I want 7 exactly the same, and can I have them tomorrow? It's a year and a half from the time you order it till they show up and you put it in service. So you always have to be thinking way ahead of the schedule on what you think you're going to need.
And before we run out of time, you're looking for a public information officer. What will this person do, and what are the qualifications?
Yeah, so we believe we have filled that. That's an internal recruitment. So we've brought up one of our internal firefighters that has agreed to step up and take on that role. She has a background in her formal education was in mass communication, so she comes highly credentialed, and so we believe that we'll be able to formalize that position and transition her somewhere around the middle of August to the 1st of September. So there's about a 2-week window we're going to try and transition. So we're finalizing a few things there, but we're excited about that because that position will help provide more rapid and more accurate information to the public. We struggle because it's something I have to do on top of other duties or one of the other chiefs, and we're not always the best at that with the other competing interests we have. We also have a new administrative officer, which is an outside employee. It's replacing a position that we lost to retirement, but we bring in a new administrative officer, and she starts tomorrow, and so we're excited about having her on board, and so next time we meet, we'll bring her and have her introduce.
All of this is necessary because Lincoln is growing.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be this need for firefighters and fire stations and equipment if the city was contracting, but it's not.
Yeah, the geography of the city, and that's a good problem to have, though, when you think about it, is we are growing. There's a lot of cities that we would normally compare our maybe the statistics that we want to measure, we would compare to, but they're in a dying population. So their budget shrinks every year. The number of firefighters, they shrink every year. They're a dying community, but we're not. We're growing. And so that's a good problem to have. We wish it would just grow a little slower so we could kind of stay up with it, but it's a good problem to have.
Well, we proudly talk about this on a regular basis here on LNK TV with Fire Chief Michael Despeen. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks, everybody, for being here today.
It's everybody's responsibility to be fire safe. Improper cigarette disposal is one of the leading causes of fires in homes.
As someone who's been a victim of a cigarette-related fire, I ask you to put out your cigarette safely.
One flick can ruin many lives.
Please, put out your cigarette safely.
Learn how to stop the fire before it starts. Visit tobaccofreelancastercounty.org for information about safe cigarette disposal.